On this episode of China Unscripted, China is making America look weak. The Biden administration's diplomacy seems to be failing, and China's conquest of Taiwan has already begun. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Matt Gnezda.
And Shelley is off trying to secretly infiltrate a PLA base in the South China Sea. She will return. But joining us once again today is Guermantes Lailari. He's a retired U.S. Air Force Foreign Area Officer specializing in the Middle East and Europe, as well as a strategy, irregular warfare, and missile defense expert. Last year, he was a Ministry of Foreign Affairs Taiwan Fellow. This year, he's a visiting scholar at National Chengchi University in Taipei. Thanks for joining us again, G-Man.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Definitely. So I'd like to start by talking about the spy balloon incident. That was really a case where Americans suddenly became aware of the Chinese Communist Party as a real threat, military threat to the United States. What did the spy balloon tell us about the CCP and how it views the U.S.?
Well, simply, they don't really care about rules, and they also are trying to test us and see what our resolve is in dealing with their gray zone warfare, where they try to do things in a way just below war, but still are conducting activities that help them should war occur. That balloon was flying over many strategic sites throughout the United States, and unfortunately, the U.S. government didn't say anything about it until somebody in Montana looked up and said, "Oh, there's a balloon. What's that?"
The response was the response of the U.S. government was strange, but also for me, I remember being kind of surprised by the response of the American public. Just because for me, I kind of know China, a spy balloon is the least of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to the U.S. But I guess for a lot of people, it was just such a visual thing that it was like, oh, this really is going on.
Well, as they say, picture it didn't happen.
Sure.
And I think that there's another reason, too. The U.S. government seemed to have not wanted anyone to notice it because Secretary of State Blinken was about to leave to Beijing to meet with his best buddy, Xi Jinping. And that kind of messed up his trip. And now we're seeing him getting ready to go again. And I think that's probably related to the fact that the FBI hasn't released anything about this balloon.
Do you think that the spy balloon incident for U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, is that embarrassing or is it leverage?
No, it was embarrassing because, the State Department in general, is all about talking most of the time. In this case, Blinken and his group of folks want to really talk to the Chinese leadership and show that they're thawing out the relationship. But these incidents continue to occur and cause bumps in the road. Now, I'm thinking that perhaps the reason why the FBI isn't releasing anything, because then the whole issue will be regenerating and people will be talking about it again. And frankly, I don't think Blinken wants anybody to talk about it and wants it to go away.
Do you think the reason why we haven't found out what is in the debris of the spy balloon, do you think it's being purposefully throttled by the U.S. government?
I think it's being purposely delayed. Clearly, the moment they had pieces of those objects in their hands, it's very clear what they were. That was such a huge object. It was like 3 buses full of stuff. And clearly they know that it was intelligence collection and all the associated parts of that system. And I don't understand why they don't do it. But I suspect the reason is because they don't want to reignite. And the Chinese government has been clear about not telling us to stop talking about this topic. That's what they've been directing our government to do.
So I don't know if this is me just being crazy pants or if this makes sense, but wouldn't it be better for the U.S. public and the media to be talking about this as Blinken goes to China, because then Blinken can demand more concessions from the CCP because there's that public pressure and scrutiny.
That would make sense in a normal world, but I suspect that one of the conditions that China has made for Blinken is to make sure that the whole topic is not brought up again. And if it is brought up, then he won't be able to see Xi Jinping. In other words, it's a means to keep the information out of the public view.
Yeah, I think this is a serious weakness with the Biden administration approach to China. When Biden was running, he promised an era of relentless diplomacy. And while that sounds good on paper, clearly what the CCP sees is that if the Biden administration wants diplomacy, that means they want to have talks with high-level Chinese officials. They have been cutting off that access and really using somehow the Communist Party has used diplomacy as leverage against the U.S. If you want to talk to us, don't say any of the things that we don't want. And that just seems so backwards.
I mean, that's the definition of diplomatic warfare, and that's part of their overall unrestricted warfare. Diplomatic warfare is exactly the category that they're using to make the U.S. kowtow or kurtow to their desires. And one of the main things they want to do is don't want any bad or any kind of negative reference to China.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. It seemed like after the Trump administration, the Biden administration wanted to do something very different. They wanted to do, diplomacy is back again. But we're seeing that without any, for lack of a better word, without the threat of a hammer, diplomacy for the sake of diplomacy doesn't do anything.
Right. I mean, if you reference the Trump administration, I mean, you need to have diplomacy with a spine. In other words, you need to be able to say, you need to be able to walk away from negotiations and feel like you're in a better position. You should never go into a conversation in a weak position. And every time that we attempt to talk to China, it seems like we're being told by China the conditions under which we will talk to them. They're telling us how to behave, which is a weak position.
Didn't it come out that there was at least one spy balloon that came across the U.S. during the Trump administration, though?
Yes, but the Biden administration was kind of fuzzy about the details. My understanding was that the spy balloon did cross into the U.S., but it was probably only a northern part of Alaska, and then it sort of disappeared. So, again, the Biden administration wants to make it look like they're the ones who did something about it, and the other administrations didn't do anything about it. But the only reason they did something about it was because a citizen in Montana noticed it. So, they're trying to spin this in a way that makes them look good.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Blinken did not cancel his trip to China until after the spy balloon was spotted, after it became a media sensation. They seemingly try to keep it quiet.
Right. I mean, the issue of the spy balloon is really strategic because this balloon is crossing into our territorial space without our permission, and it's conducting intelligence collection. No different than, in the old Cold War days where, we might have flown U-2 missions over Russia, and then we got shot down, and we had to eventually admit the fact that we had done that, and we stopped doing that because of the risk. But what they're doing is persistent. I mean, it wasn't just one balloon; it was 4 balloons, and that's what we know so far. We don't know if they are continuing it because we haven't heard from the U.S. government more of them.
Well, I know now that the U.S. government is saying that these Chinese spy balloons have flown all over the world for a long time. It seemed incredible that we're only finding out about this now.
Well, we're finding out about it now because they have to do something to make it look like they're doing something about it. After the first balloon was shot down, the State Department got together, I think almost 60 or 70 countries, and briefed the diplomats on the balloon program that we knew about for a long time. But until that point, we hadn't apparently briefed anybody about these. So the fact is that we hadn't briefed anybody about it. We knew about it. We should have been warning our friends about this problem a long time ago. And, we kind of forced the hand. Now, I think that one of the things that's going on, though, is that maybe the balloons have stopped for a while so that they're not an embarrassment and so that Blinken can come. But I think it's contingent on the fact that the FBI does not publicize anything until perhaps after Blinken gets back. Or even if they do publicize it, it'll be very minimal about the information associated with it.
Now, I'm just wondering, like for me, considering all of the ways that China spies on the U.S. and wages unrestricted warfare, is the information that they could get from a spy balloon really that valuable?
Okay, so here's the deal. Satellites can only get so much because they're so far away. The unique things about this balloon is its altitude and what it could collect. So I presume that it could collect similar to what, let's say, a high-flying U-2 could collect, which is signals intelligence and imagery intelligence. Now, one of the things that the PLA is doing is they're developing hypersonic missiles. You've had some programs about that. And what they need to know is how to launch the hypersonic missile to avoid radar, the radars that the U.S. has and Canada has as part of NORAD. So this balloon can collect information about those radars at a low altitude, or the altitude that a hypersonic missile or even their own bombers can fly to avoid detection. And furthermore, they could develop stealth technology that would basically be calibrated to what these radars are designed to collect. Now, one of the things that was interesting was the fact that the size of these reconnaissance balloons or the payloads associated with them have been getting smaller. And so what they're doing, some people say, is they're checking the calibration of these radars, for example. Another example is they flew over some seriously important military bases, such as Offutt Air Force Base, which is the headquarters of U.S. Strategic Command, which controls all of the U.S. nuclear weapon systems. Now, to get that close and to collect some of the signals that are coming out of there is very significant. Who knows what they collected in terms of perhaps phone calls or some vulnerabilities that are associated with that location. I used to serve at Offutt Air Force Base, and I would be very, very surprised to see an adversary's balloon with intelligence collection package above the base. The other thing about that balloon was it was steerable. In other words, it seems to have its own ability to maneuver and hover over sites. So what it was doing in some places, it was hovering over, let's say, Offutt Air Force Base or another base, Maelstrom, where there are missile silos or other bases where we have bombers, and collecting information. I mean, that's unheard of, that they were able to collect signals intelligence and imagery. Now, some of the imagery also you can't get from space. At that altitude, it's much more refined, and for targeting purposes. Now, if the PLA, which it wants to target those strategic sites, the calibration of that target is much better at the altitude that they were flying at, as opposed to the satellites that are flying high. Now, obviously, like you mentioned, there are spies here on the ground, but they can't fly over those bases because it's a restricted zone. And if they fly with let's say, a rented aircraft, they would be forced down and they would be found out. The balloon had lots of effect, and it goes back to also the psychological effect, the media effect, and the legal effect of the three warfares that are associated with unrestricted warfare.
Well, when you frame it like that, it just seems incredulous to me that the U.S. would allow the spy balloon to fly across basically the entire continental United States and try to cover it up just so Blinken can get a meeting with Xi Jinping or a trip in China. That seemed insane to me.
Well, that's why the American people were upset. I mean, You know, and it was visible. You know, the spies on the ground are less visible. What they're doing in terms of stealing intellectual property and other technology is less visible, but that balloon is very visible. You know, the only thing missing is a red balloon with a CCP flag on it or something. You know,
That would have made it clearer.
We should give them that advice for next time.
please make it clear to us that you're flying a reconnaissance balloon over our country and identify it so that we know it's you, not somebody else. Yeah. And at first, they denied it was theirs, and then they said it was a weather balloon, and we even used their propaganda. Oh yes, it probably is a weather balloon. But as some people got photos of it, they said, no, this is not a weather balloon. It's huge. It's got solar panels.
I don't know. When the government tells me it's a weather balloon,
I mean, also every time I hear it was a weather balloon, I'm like, I feel like that just signifies a cover up, right?
And weather balloons don't go thousands of miles, by the way. They just go up maybe a few hundred miles, and then they come down and they collect the data that was on those balloons. This balloon also had satellite communication, you know, uplinks and all kinds of antennas and cameras and stuff like that. So,
since you are an expert in irregular warfare, how does this tie into the Communist Party's broader unrestricted warfare? And you mentioned psychological warfare being an aspect of this. What is this? How does this fit into the bigger picture?
so if you think about it, what they're signaling is the inability for the U.S. government to protect the American population from the CCP. I mean, that's the big picture. Imagine if this balloon had weapons on it and they were to kick out either bombs or if they had cruise missiles on it. That's the psychological aspect. Is at first no one knew what was on it, but it was big enough to carry weapons, and so it could have been used as a means to deliver those weapons. So there's a fear factor affecting the fact that we're vulnerable, makes us feel vulnerable, and so the people of the United States feel like their government isn't doing their job, and so that's the effect that the Communist Party wants to have, is to show that the impotence of the U.S. government. The legal aspect is that they were able to violate our airspace, and we didn't do anything about it until the very end. And the key, one of the key things that my co-author wrote in the articles we had on this topic, is he pointed out that the U.S. government kept on emphasizing the fact that we didn't want to shoot it down because of safety. They never talked about the fact that it was a reconnaissance system. It was always about, we see this balloon and we don't want to shoot it down because of safety. And then later on, we shoot it down over land. So what happened to the safety factor in the first story? It's a lie. They just didn't want to call it a reconnaissance balloon until later on. So even the U.S. government was having problems with how it would describe this balloon, which was clearly a reconnaissance balloon. So there was a legal aspect of it, in the sense that China can imagine if instead of a balloon, it was a bomber flying over the United States. That's clearly psychologically a strong message to the American people that you're all vulnerable. You can't stop us. We are more powerful than you are. You can't fly over our country, but we can fly over your country.
Now I'm thinking about the recent incidents in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, where a Chinese jet made dangerous maneuvers in front of a U.S. Air Force craft. Same thing with the U.S. Navy ship in the Taiwan Strait, I believe that was, where another Chinese ship came close by. It seems just like open contempt at this point.
Yeah, and some people are saying that, oh, it's just some, in the case of the aircraft, it's just some pilot who's a little aggressive and he's doing these things. Look, I served over 20 years in the U.S. Air Force. No one does any of those kind of activities without permission from above. Okay? And I'm talking way above the military. There's no way that any military officer would tell a fighter pilot to do those maneuvers without political support. If there was something that the CCP didn't want, it would never happen. You know, in the worst case scenario, when the pilot came down, he'd be shot. Okay, but this is continuing. It's all part of their gray zone thing where they disregard the law, going back to legal warfare or lawfare. They want to push the limits. And one of the key points of unrestricted warfare, one of the famous quotes in the book is, in unrestricted warfare, there are no rules. So they disregard all rules as much as they can. And, you know, so far they've kept it under, you know, within the sort of below the war level. But if you remember in 2001, we had a stupid Navy pilot from the PLA Navy fly too close to our EP3, and his wing hit the Navy wing. He crashed, he died, and our aircrew had to do an emergency landing on Hainan Island, which is controlled by the PRC, and our guys had to stay in government confinement for over a week. Okay, so that was very close to war. I mean, if that fighter pilot had, instead of clipping our wing, clipped the wing off, those guys would have been dead. The whole crew would have been dead. And so they're playing with fire. But what they're doing is that they can say, we don't follow the rules. We don't have to follow the rules. You guys can follow the rules, but we don't. And then just one other thing, you know, the fact that the military side of the PLA is refusing to answer calls on the hotline between the Pentagon and Beijing makes it even worse, because something like this happens, if they don't answer the call, there's no telling how the escalation will go.
Well, on that note, Xi Jinping recently, he gave 2 speeches where he said China must be ready for, quote, extreme scenarios, including conflict with the West. What would a military conflict with the West look like? They're trying to keep this unrestricted warfare below the threshold of war, but it sounds like a war could accidentally happen. It sounds like someday they might actually want a war.
Well, I think that he's messaging at least 2 groups of people. One group is obviously the message to his own people, to let them know that something could happen, which means that he could be encouraging his own military to go beyond what they've been doing. In other words, they could become more aggressive, and there could be an escalation scenario where something worse than 2001 occurs, where Allied air crews or Allied ships, people die. I mean, historically, the PLA Navy has killed Vietnamese sailors in the what I call the Southeast Asian Sea, not the so-called South China Sea. Of course, the Vietnamese call it the East Vietnamese Sea, but they have killed other military personnel on high seas, and I suspect he's messaging them to be more aggressive. Now, I don't think this is going to cause a World War III. I think that, unfortunately, if this happens, people are going to die, and it's going to raise tensions. And so that's the messaging internal. External, I think he's messaging the world that they can afford to be more aggressive. And going back to the balloon and going back to all the other activities they're doing this activity with impunity. There is no cost to them for doing this. We should stop talking to them or punish them for the balloon incident. We didn't punish them. We should punish them for the aircraft incident. We didn't punish them. We should punish them for lazing our aircrew and blinding our personnel. There's no punishment involved. So they're encouraged to continue this activity, and they're going to continue it. And unfortunately, with the messaging that you just quoted, it seems to me that it's going to get worse because he wants it to get worse.
It's nothing a little diplomacy can't solve.
Well, it seems to me that what Blinken is doing is kowtowing. I mean, if you know the history of that word, of just a very quick digression, kowtow was an official process for you to approach the emperor of China during the Qing dynasty, and they learned it from previous dynasties. You had to prostrate yourself several times in front of the emperor, and once, if the emperor approved your approaching the emperor, then he would signal that. But we're talking getting down on your knees, getting down on your face, and putting your face on the ground and doing this prostration thing. That's kowtow. That's kurtow. And I think that's what he's making the U.S. government do, even though they're the ones who are doing the aggression. But we're trying to open up a dialogue, and we don't punish them. We should shut down communications. We should boycott anytime they have a meeting with us. We should walk out. There's no consequence for their activity.
The reason that kowtowing worked during the Qing dynasty is the Qing emperor was incredibly powerful, right? And people understood that, okay, like I'm nothing compared to the power of this imperial dynasty. But in the case of the US, like the US should realize that when it comes to economics, when it comes to military and probably other factors, the US is still at a strategic advantage and is still more powerful than the Chinese Communist Party. So really just thinking about it that way, let alone what's morally right or right according to our values, like just even in terms of the power dynamic, it's just the wrong way to go.
Well, you should advise the State Department, because that's exactly what the issue is. I mean, I have some major concerns about the State Department and some of the other people in the administration. I mean, prior to showing up to working for the government, Anthony Blinken was part of an organization, a company that did a lot of investment in China. A lot of these people have had a lot of experience investing in China. I have suspicions about their intentions, and they're doing everything they can to engage China, and China is playing hard to get. It's a strange, and like you said, it's strange that we're playing the weaker player. This is wrong.
I mean, a lot of the people in the Biden administration are, they used to work for the Obama administration as well, guys like Kurt Campbell. And definitely back then, the policy was find out what angers China and don't do it.
Well, Newsweek came out with an article in 2021 analyzing a lot of the people in the Biden administration and their connection with China. And it's quite pervasive. And Kurt Campbell is one of those people who, prior to working in the current administration, the 4 years of let's say the intermission between Obama and Biden, they were heavily engaged in business in China. Blinken, Ellie Ratner, all these people were doing serious business in China. You can look it up, Newsweek 2021.
So what I'm hearing is we don't understand China as well as these experts, so that's why we're coming to these wrong conclusions.
Well, maybe they're thinking about retirement.
Getting back to the diplomacy angle, which is that if, the Biden administration has this idea of relentless diplomacy, but one of the challenges is you have to figure out what the goal of diplomacy is.
Yeah.
And I think that diplomacy is not its own end, right? So what's the goal? I mean, you might think that the goal would be to prevent war or to end wars that have started. You might think it's to protect the American public, to protect or to stand up for American values, or it might be to protect business interests. And in this case, I feel like a lot of the diplomacy does have an end goal, but that goal is to protect specific business interests. And the problem with that is not that I'm not opposed to companies making money, but the problem is that if they're making money in China with a regime that is trying to destroy us, and then we're trying to protect that investment, I feel like that's just deeply problematic.
So in theory, the main focus of our diplomacy and our national strategy should be based on our national security strategy with the which the Biden administration published, and they listed the key areas that they believe the U.S. should protect. They're classically the free and open borders and free commerce and non-interference in business. That's typically most administrations have that. But what's happening is we're kind of absent in that area. We're allowing China to push in almost every direction, and we're not pushing back. I mean, you've had Cleo Pascal several times on your program, and she recently testified in Congress. She talked about a strategy of a block and push. So we should be blocking China's malign influence, and we should be pushing our agenda, which is basically allow people to do normal trade and other activities. But we're just absent. We're absent in so many different areas. The South China Sea, China's continuing to be aggressive against. Recently, there were incidents. I think it was with the Philippine Navy. They wanted to replenish one of their little islets that had a ship on it with their sailors, and the Chinese Coast Guard prevented a replenishment activity. And we say nothing. We do nothing. So I think there's a confusion as to what our national security strategy should look like versus what's written. We're not pursuing what we wrote. We're basically allowing China to encroach on every dimension of the world, diplomatically, financially, psychologically, even in the military sphere. I mean, we're just letting them go at it.
I think this goes back to, what we've been saying on the show has been a big weakness of the Biden administration's approach to China is that they don't realize it's an ideological struggle, that the Chinese Communist Party, in their own constitution, they say they're a Marxist-Leninist regime. This was something Secretary of State Mike Pompeo talked about a lot, but has been completely absent from any Biden administration official discussion of China.
Yeah, and the ideological war is part of unrestricted warfare. If you look at the chart that the two colonels wrote in 1999, ideological war is part of unrestricted war. And so there's so many different dimensions that they are pursuing, and we're just ignoring it. We don't want to bring up the fact that we're dealing with a communist country. When have you heard the term communist said by a diplomat by the U.S. government?
I believe they call it state capitalism.
We call it China, People's Republic of China. We don't call it the Chinese Communist Party. We don't use the word communist. We avoid that term. We don't want to remind our own people that there is an ideological struggle. We just want to make them think that just another country that we're having a disagreement with right now, and we're trying to get back on track.
Well, I know this is all, the next big step in this is Taiwan. But before we get to that, just to kind of round out the conversation about the spy balloon and espionage, recently it's been reported that China is building a spy base in Cuba. And this is also a case where the White House first denied it and then later came out saying, yeah, it's true, and China's been using Cuba to spy on the U.S. for a long time. What is happening with the spy base in Cuba?
So there's a mixture of truth and falseness in the messaging. The Russians have been in Cuba for a long time with at least two bases that were conducting intelligence collection of SIGINT and any other means that they could along our southern border, from Florida all the way to Texas, and anything they can collect in between. It's also a good location to collect against our satellites because it's close to Florida. I believe after the Soviets were there, China was invited by the Cubans to join the Soviets, and they've been there. Now, what I understand is in the 90s, the Russian government decided to pull the plug on the intelligence collection site and start shutting it down. The Chinese stayed on, and what the new news is, which isn't clear in the press, my interpretation is that what China is doing is going to build a new base to enhance the collection that they want to do against the United States. And in part of that collection is to enhance their ability to target. I mean, it's multidimensional. Obviously, collecting intelligence on military, political, commercial, all these different factors. But for example, that spy balloon that was flying over the United States we mentioned before could have been communicating with the folks, the PLA folks in Cuba, because it's fairly high and it could communicate with it or uplink and downlink. This is all part of the, let's say, the espionage or the overall intelligence collection that China does. And so they have human collection on the ground in the United States. They have overhead. They have intelligence sites around the United States. And they are needing to increase that collection. And a part of that collection is also the cyber dimension. For example, trying to enter into, let's say, back doors into banks, into hospitals, into the U.S. government, like the famous OPM compromise that where they collected someone, or it's presumably the Chinese, got access to everybody in the United States who had a security clearance and every single data associated with them, such as all their friends, etc., and their family. So China is pursuing as much intelligence collection as they can on the U.S. government, the U.S. people, U.S. businesses. And so what they're doing, according to my interpretation, is they're enhancing the site that the Russians, well, first the Soviets and the Russians, had in Cuba. Their ability is increasing, and most Americans weren't aware of the fact that they were there for a long time. And the difference is they are now increasing that intelligence effort, just like the balloon.
So with all this as background, the Chinese Communist Party making the U.S. seem weak, which it seems it's been in a very weak position. Do you think an invasion of Taiwan is more or less likely now?
So, you've had several speakers talk about this before. Look, there's lots of different options that the PLA has, and I believe that the invasion scenario is probably the most dangerous scenario for them, because they take the highest risk. Because if they lose, like the Russians are, let's say, right now, they're not winning the war in Ukraine. If the PLA doesn't win quickly, the Chinese people and the people around the world will look at China as being weak. So I'm not sure that I believe the most likely scenario is a blockade or something like that. But I don't think right now that all these actions mean that China is going to do an invasion or a blockade in the near term. I think they're pursuing unrestricted warfare, and they're trying to make people think that they're stronger than the U.S., and they're demonstrating that by their actions, whether over the U.S., next to the U.S., or in the Taiwan Strait or around Taiwan. Now, one of the things that they're doing is to showing again the weakness, the psychological effect, is they're sending drones now around Taiwan to circle Taiwan, or at least on the East Coast. That never was done until last August, after Speaker Pelosi came to visit Taiwan. And what that means, again, that messaging is that, you're vulnerable. We can fly around your country. And I ascribe this behavior, but if you think about how animals, let's say, attack their prey, whether it's a lion or shark. I mean, sharks go around their prey until it's time to attack. This is the same behavior. And whether it's subconscious or conscious, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to show Taiwan that Taiwan is vulnerable. And by the way, the PLA is doing the same thing for Japan. They're having their ships go around Japan. They're flying around Japan with their bombers along with the Russians, and they're doing the same behavior, the circling thing, which affects the psychology of the people that they're circling. Again, showing that they're vulnerable, just like the balloon shows that the U.S. is vulnerable. And so these behaviors affect the overall morale of a country and make them feel weaker. And that's just one type of behavior. And I think that these actions show that China is continuing to push. There's a famous quote by Lenin that says, you have a bayonet and you push. If you find mush, you keep on pushing. If you find steel, you withdraw. Where's the steel? There's no steel. So they keep on pushing and pushing and pushing.
I mean, what's the protocol here, though? Like, can Taiwan shoot down a Chinese drone that's entered? They can't. I mean, Taiwan's got an air defense identification zone, which is very large, and then an airspace, which is basically just over the islands and maybe extends a little bit over the ocean, right? Can Taiwan shoot down drones if they're in its airspace or air defense identification zone?
Okay, so legally, according to international law, although we'll get to that issue, international law applying to Taiwan is a kind of a fuzzy thing for some.
Oh, right, because it's a province of China, right?
Right, but let's say that I believe that Taiwan is an independent country, and most people in the world believe that, unless you're a diplomat sitting in Foggy Bottom, but that's okay. Now, Taiwan views it as a violation of their airspace if the drone flies from the territorial waters, which is 12 nautical miles off the coast of Taiwan, over land. And that includes all of its islands, unless there's a shorter space between China and the Taiwanese island, like Matsu or Kinmen, then it's just a halfway point. Okay, that's the definition of territorial waters, is if there's nobody nearby, it's 12 nautical miles. So theoretically, when the PLA flies a drone either over the territorial waters within 12 nautical miles or over land, the Taiwanese military will shoot it down. That's the general concept. The problem is, I've discovered, based on Japanese reporting of what these aircraft are doing near Taiwan, their reports show that recently, last month, a drone twice flew within the territorial waters of Taiwan, not the main island, but Orchid Island. They flew within less than 12 nautical miles. Now, the Taiwanese government didn't report it. They didn't show it on any map, but the Japanese government did, and Jane's reported it as well using the Japanese data. Now, it's possible that the Taiwanese government doesn't have the ability to shoot it down from Orchid Island, or didn't have any aircraft nearby to shoot it down. However, this is the problem. I believe that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, I said it, communist, okay, is going to present Taiwan with several scenarios in both the military domain and other domains that are lose-lose for Taiwan and are win-win for China. How do I mean? So let's say a drone does actually fly, let's say directly over Taipei, right? Now, let's look at the options. They shoot it down or they don't shoot it down. Let's say they shoot it down. What's coming up in January of next year is elections. So by shooting it down, it feeds into the opposition parties, which is the TPP and the KMT, notion that the DPP, the current government, is a warmongering party. And so this reinforces that message and will degrade, let's say, the opinion of the people. That's the intent of the Chinese Communist Party, is to degrade the opinion of the people in Taiwan so that they do not vote for the DPP next year. If they don't shoot it down, the same parties can say, look, you're incapable of protecting the country. You can't protect the country. We can, because we're willing to talk to China. You're not. And so because you can't shoot down a drone that flew over Taipei, we're going to say to you and to the people of Taiwan, you shouldn't be in charge because you can't protect Taiwan. So I believe this is one example of many examples of actions that the Chinese Communist Party is going to have against Taiwan, not only in the military domain, but in many other domains. We talked about the diplomatic, we talked about many other areas that they're going to do to make the DPP look bad. And no matter what they do, they will be lose-lose. And it will help the opposition. That's my interpretation of what's going to happen. Now, I hope I'm wrong, but based on the fact that they've already crossed into the territorial waters of Taiwan off of Orchid Island, I suspect that's one of their plans. And I also suspect, sorry, just one more thing, is that there might have been some coordination between the CCP and the KMT when the KMT leadership went to China several times in the last year to meet with the Taiwan Affairs Office of the Communist Party, and they've done it. So I hope that's not the case, but I wouldn't put it past them to coordinate these activities and be prepared for the psychological messaging that would be associated with this kind of activity.
I think at the core of this is being able to correctly judge the sentiment of Taiwanese voters. When we were there in 2020 in January to cover the elections, then one of the things that I found intriguing and a little bit surprising is that a lot of the support for the DPP wasn't about their progressive domestic politics, but rather many voters voted for them because they wanted a party that was going to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, this was coming like right in the wake of these, 8-month long Hong Kong protests.
I agree with you 100% that Hong Kong changed the outcome of the election in Taiwan. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Right. And it did in 2020, right? So here's my question, which is if the DPP shoots down a Chinese drone, like I get that the CCP will think this is an opportunity to make the DPP look like warmongers. But that is the CCP assuming that the Taiwanese population will vote against the DPP for that reason. But is it possible that they're misjudging that? Like, where is the Taiwanese voter sentiment with regards to actually being willing to go to war to defend Taiwan?
According to polling, a vast majority of Taiwanese people in all generation groups have stated, like we're talking above 70%, have stated that they are willing to fight for Taiwan. Okay. And of course, things change when bullets start occurring, so it probably will go up. But the problem is that there's a balance here, and the DPP, in my opinion, has tried to avoid any kind of engagement that will, let's say, intensify the interaction between the Communist Party of China and the government in Taiwan. And they've tried to not react to, let's say, the August event of the exercises where the missiles flew over Taiwan and landed in both the economic exclusive zone of Japan and the Philippines. And they've also kind of not reacted to when McCarthy met with the President Tsai in California in April. They basically have non-responded to try to keep things calm. The problem is that they're concerned about people thinking that war is imminent and scaring people and making people think that they should leave Taiwan because things are going to happen. And so I think that trying to balance that is very difficult when you have an aggressive neighbor that wants to force a reaction of a government that doesn't want to do any reaction. So that's why I say lose-lose. Now, yeah, you're possibly correct in that the Taiwanese population will recognize that this is a provocation, intentional provocation to influence the election. Um, and I hope that the current government, the DPP, is prepared with a messaging campaign in case that happens, in case they shoot it down, or in case something else happens. And it's kind of a crapshoot, so to speak, of what's going to happen, because obviously the adversary has a vote in all this, and the Taiwanese government can't control let's say, an escalation scenario, and it could get it out of hand, and it could backfire, as you say. But I think that the Chinese Communist Party has also learned some lessons from the previous events. They weren't able to prevent Tsai from getting elected in 2016 and 2020. In 1996, when they fired missiles near Taiwan during President Lee election campaign to try to scare the people, that backfired. So I suspect that they've learned some lessons, and they're gonna do some actions that are maybe different, and they're hoping that their actions are going to help the two candidates who oppose the DPP. Now, recently there was a poll that the TPP is now ahead of the KMT in the polling. I believe it's like 31% is TPP, and the KMT is about 26%, and the DPP, the ruling party, is in 37%. So there's an interesting dynamic happening here in Taiwan, where the TPP lead contender, his position is that Taiwan, and he's winning in the polls, below the DPP but above the KMT. His message is, we don't need weapons in Taiwan. This is very disturbing that the population, according to polling, is in agreement. A third of the population is in agreement with that concept, which is ludicrous. There's a lot of balancing going on. It's not going to be clear cut as how this election is going to go.
So you mentioned the TPP, which is the Taiwan People's Party, right? And so, sort of, we know that the current government, the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, is in favor of more aggressive defense of Taiwan when it comes to the CCP, whereas the KMT is in favor of, let's say, more diplomatic solutions. Where does the TPP stand in this?
Well, they're also in favor of diplomatic solutions, but they've gone even further and basically have said, we don't need weapons. And so, obviously, by this theory, by this strategy, they're putting Taiwan in a much weaker position if they get elected. And if they form a coalition with the KMT, I think this will be devastating for the future of Taiwan. And interesting, the CCP apparently is messaging the Taiwanese population and their own population that they favor the TPP, because obviously that makes Taiwan weaker quicker. And so that means that they can take over Taiwan, let's say, without maybe fighting sooner, which is exactly what the Communist Party of China has always been. Their preferred outcome of the Taiwan relationship with them is a Hong Kong scenario where it's a peaceful takeover with maybe a few people protesting, as opposed to an all-out war invasion scenario.
Well, I think this does a really good job of kind of explaining how the Chinese Communist Party views unrestricted warfare, because with this reframing in mind, you see the rising military aggression from the Chinese Communist Party, crossing the Taiwan Strait with military craft, crossing into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. You see these military actions not as a prelude to a military invasion, but really as a form of election interference.
Yeah, I mean, you could say, so in 1999, when the two PLA colonels wrote the book on unrestricted warfare, they had a category called non-military, okay? And that included ideological warfare. I would add exactly what you said, election warfare, because they don't need to worry about the outcome of their elections. What they can do is manipulate democratic elections, and they've been doing it. Russia's been doing it for a long time, and we've seen lots of examples of them manipulating elections, and they're getting better and better at this concept. I mean, we saw it. We saw it in the Solomon Islands, where there was heavily bribery going on, and bribery, co-option, elite capture. These are all tactics that they are employing throughout the world, and they're being successful at a very slow rate, but slowly but surely, just like the bayonet, they're pushing and pushing and pushing, and they're slowly getting their way.
I'm curious, what is the TPP argument for why Taiwan doesn't need weapons?
Because they believe that they can peacefully exist with China, sort of like a Hong Kong scenario, but better. Because Taiwan is better than Hong Kong, and they would never need to, have to worry. And they're still under the delusion of, two systems, one country concept, which was what was sold to Hong Kong until Xi Jinping said, "Well, we're going to change the rules. Now we're in charge." And so, I think that's a delusion. And there are people who believe that. And a lot of those people believe that because they have corporate companies. There are some Taiwanese companies, just like there are American companies in communist China operating, and they seem to operate quite nicely.
Yeah, like Foxconn that makes our iPhones.
Yes, exactly. So this is the deception that's occurring, and some people believe it, and the more you lie, the more people believe it, and I think they're mistaken. And history has shown that each place that China took over illegally, such as Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, such as Xinjiang, such as Tibet, such as Hong Kong and Macau, and all these places, and the islands in the Southeast Asian Sea, etc., and parts of Vietnam that they didn't return to Vietnam after the 1979 war. All these places are clear indications that this fantasy that they can live peacefully with the communist regime in Beijing is really, really dangerous.
Well, one of the interesting things about the TPP, the Taiwan People's Party, is that its chairman, I believe, is Ko Wen-je, right, the former mayor of Taipei.
Yeah, that's correct. And he was also, prior to that, he was a medical doctor. And
right. And I remember a few years ago, one of the guests that we had on the show, Ethan Gutman, had alleged in his book, The Slaughter, that Ko Wen-je had knowingly sent Taiwanese people to get organ transplants in China, knowing that those organs came from killing Chinese dissidents like Falun Gong or House Christians, and that Ko Wen-je was like okay with this. That was the allegation, at least.
Right, and I can give you an update. I mean, I know Ethan Gutman. He was here for 6 months in Taiwan, and I met with him often. And according to him, Ko tried to prosecute him for libel, and it never proceeded.
Yeah, that was thrown out, I believe. The
exactly,
case.
it was thrown out. And I think there was another aspect to Ethan's allegation, which was that Ko also taught Chinese surgeons techniques to more efficiently remove organs from patients. And again, I believe that was his allegation. And my understanding was that, again, that was thrown out as well because he's a good surgeon, I guess. So,
Huh. So now that same guy is the head of a major Taiwanese political party that wants to have closer relations with the Chinese Communist Party. This sounds like great news.
I can see why the CCP favors the TPP.
yes, and they're very happy that he and his party are according to polling in number two. And if they were to combine with the KMT, they would beat the DPP right now if the election were to occur, according to polling. But we don't know what's going to happen between now and the election time. Things could change, and that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about that there will be actions that they've concocted that will perhaps push those numbers in favor of political parties that will compromise the democratic country of Taiwan's independence.
So, what can countries around the world do to counteract the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare? Because, as you said, in the case of Taiwan, they try and make it a lose-lose proposition for anyone trying to fight back.
Right. So the first thing is the countries that are members of the UN Security Council who are democratic, which would include the United States, France, United Kingdom, they need to step up and push back and use all measures available to them to encourage pro-Taiwanese other nations who are maybe less powerful to step up. So many countries are waiting for the U.S. to do something because they're afraid of getting stomped by the Communist Party in China, as they have done in the past with Australia, Japan, Lithuania, many countries around the world, where these countries have stepped up a little bit and have been hammered by the CCP. So if the United States, for example, were to make a statement about in the diplomatic arena, and let's say they would continue to increase the technological boycotting of the communist China, and in other areas, pushing back, maybe more military presence in the Southeast Asian Sea, supporting more military exercises with the Philippines, maybe encouraging, maybe providing incentives for more countries to do business with the non-communist friendly countries in the United States and India, for example. India would be a great country to move a lot of operations to. In other words, be a leader. And the United States doesn't appear to be that leader right now. And so a lot of countries are afraid to be the nail that sticks up and get hammered by the CCP. So there has to be at least one of these countries who is not fearful of the CCP, and build a coalition that will respond and push and block and push back on the CCP. And until that happens, a lot of countries are scared to do anything because they know that economically they can get punished by China.
Well, the good thing is the United States isn't just another nail, it's an even bigger hammer.
Well, let's use it. Let's not be afraid to use the Communist Party's terminology, comprehensive national power. The United States has huge comprehensive national power, and we're not employing it. We're just letting them beat us in many of these different areas, and we need to stop it, and we need to push back. And we're not doing it in my opinion, aggressively enough to, again, going back to the picture of the bayonet, we need to put up some steel, and we need to stop them from doing things that are clearly not right, and we're not doing it. So everybody is waiting for the United States or somebody just to pick up the baton, and we're not doing it. So we need to be leaders, And then once we're leaders, the other countries will follow and work with us. I mean, we are building a coalition. I mean, there is some movement on the positive side. I can't be totally negative. Is we are building relationships. For example, the United States and India have signed 4 agreements that will enable the two countries to work together in case there's a war. It's not a full-up treaty, but it's the infrastructure for a treaty. The United States has encouraged other countries to build relationships with Japan. Japan now has agreements with Australia, with United Kingdom. Japan and South Korea have kissed and made up, so to speak, and they're now discussing a mutual defense treaty. So these are all good movements, and they're moving forward, but they're not moving forward quick enough, and there needs to be more action. For example, the United States, declared in the NDA that was signed in December that they would be training, the United States military would be training groups of 500 Taiwanese in the United States, and we would send up to 200 or more trainers to Taiwan. Well, maybe next year we should double that or triple that and continue to push back. Okay. And we should never say that we are going to reduce our support to Taiwan. We need to continue to increase. We need to show that the Chinese Communist Party that their actions have consequences. And we need to make sure that they understand what our actions are and why we're doing it in response to their misdeeds. We need to treat them like a child. And if they get out of line, we need to smack them or push back and show them that we are not afraid of doing things that will cost them something in the economic field, in the diplomatic field, in the financial field, or wherever, and ideologically. We need to develop a strategy that doesn't just focus on diplomacy and the military dimension, because we're not going to win that kind of battle, because they are operating in many other dimensions, and we aren't thinking in these many dimensions.
I just have to say the China Unscripted podcast does not advocate for smacking children. For the comments.
I didn't want to, I'm not referring to that, but, maybe put them on the stairs for a few minutes until they can control themselves.
Yeah, we have to put the CCP on timeout.
There you go. Yeah.
Timeout. That's a better word. Yeah.
Well, G-Man, thanks for being back on the show. It's been great to have you again.
Thanks again. And you guys do a great job, and I really appreciate your shows, and I hope many people continue to support your efforts, and may you prosper in your endeavors and success, and I hope you are able to continue to influence and make people understand the threat that the Chinese Communist Party presents to not only the United States, not only Taiwan, but the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Maybe someday the State Department will listen to us. And thank you for watching. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
We'll talk to you next time.